We're seeing the younger voices in Congress, like a Richie Torres on the Democrat side, Ro Khanna, and so forth, who understand technology, who are pro innovation, are starting to realize, hey, why am I going to die in this hill when this is just a technology and an asset class? It can create jobs. It can help us to incredible economic benefits the same way the dot-com boom did. It's a weird place where you have some of the older folks are like, I don't understand this. I'm going to side with Elizabeth Warren because she has the loudest voice right now. And then you have the younger Democrats who are waking up saying, yeah, that's not the way to do things.
Okay, joining us now on Open Book is author and founder of the Thinking Crypto podcast. He is also the author of the book Thinking Crypto. It's a great title. It's got a lot in there. Some of it causes me post-traumatic stress. Thinking Crypto, the crash of FTX, and the rise of safer, stronger digital assets. The remarkable Tony Edward, it's great to have you on. Before I get into the book, the podcast, everything you're doing, I want you to tell us a little bit of your origin story. How did we get to where we are now, Tony?
Well, Anthony, first and foremost, thank you for having me on. And it's kind of surreal, man, that you're interviewing me. It's usually vice versa. And, I've loved speaking to you over the years. I'm a big fan of yours. So it's an honor to be interviewed by you.
Well, listen, you got a great book that you've written. I like interviewing authors. You're a great interview anyway, so it's a double whammy for me. I get to pick your brain. I get to tease and talk to you about your book, and you get some of the best crypto guests in the country, by the way. So I love listening to your podcast. I want to ask you something that you've asked me, and I haven't had a chance to ask you yet, so I can do it here. What was the eureka moment? I can tell you mine. I was working in the White House. The Fed was talking about digitizing the U.S. dollar. I said, okay, I don't understand what's going on in the blockchain. I got to get up to speed. Of course, I got fired immediately thereafter. So it gave me plenty of time to figure it out. What was your eureka moment?
So I guess I'll give some context because I think my background is super important in the eureka moment. Growing up in the 90s, I was super into tech, into the internet. Anthony, I did some things, which thank God I'm still here, where I could have gotten in big trouble. I was exploiting vulnerabilities in Web 1.0, hacking some websites. I was part of AOL IRC chat rooms, but it wasn't for nefarious reasons. I was passionate about the internet and technology. And that passion, grew, and I started my career in digital marketing and doing a lot of different things with website building and doing things with Google and so forth. And one friend of mine told me I think it was a Friday night, we were at Buffalo Wild Wings eating some wings, having some beer, and he's like, "Hey, have you heard about this thing called Bitcoin and Ethereum?" And I'm like, "Dude, what is it? Don't talk to me about that. It looks like something like nonsense." However, he started making some money off of it, and he bought some really cool things, and then it really had my attention. I'm like, okay, tell me about it. Everybody says we come for the money, stay for the tech. And once he told me about it, I started doing my own research, and then I realized this was the next layer on top of the internet, and it's going to change the way we do commerce and trust each other. And Bitcoin absolutely made sense as a decentralized form of money on the internet. But I think what really clicked for me was Ethereum, smart contracts, and the world of opportunities that would open up, and thinking of it as a baseline software that people can build all types of trustless, decentralized applications on. So from there, I went down the rabbit hole and started investing in it, started building with it, and I've been successful so far, and I decided to start a podcast about it.
So Bitcoin only? You got a couple other coins behind you there. So you branched out behind. You're not a Bitcoin maxi though, right?
No, I see this as, look, there's different flavors for everybody. There's different blockchains and different currencies that do different things. And I think this goes back to my enthusiasm about the internet and the dot-com boom. There was Google, there was AOL, there was Yahoo, and there's different technologies, different marketplaces on the internet, different web applications. There wasn't one to rule them all. And even in a social network world, there's not just Facebook, there's Instagram, there's Twitter, and so on and so forth. So I see these things being software to do different things and serve different purposes. And I'm looking to participate in each of them and test them out and see which one functions the best and see what I can build on them. So I'm a holder of Bitcoin, Ethereum, Cardano, XRP, Solana. I'm diversified. I do tend to stay away from meme coins, though, Anthony. I don't know if you love meme coins by any chance.
Okay, but your point is that there's plenty of room in this utility space for lots of different operating platforms, and of course, Bitcoin being the big kahuna. I don't want to speak for you, but describe Bitcoin store of value. Are we going to the Bitcoin standard? Where are you in the range of outcomes for Bitcoin?
That's a great question because I've thought a lot about this, and especially in the shower. That's how much I love crypto, and sometimes I talk to my wife, and she's like, "Shut up." But Bitcoin. It's interesting because based on Satoshi's white paper, it's supposed to be this digital currency on the internet, but it does have its limitations as it relates to speed and transaction fees. However, as digital gold as a store of value, I absolutely believe in it as that. And I have it in my portfolio. And there's some Bitcoin I will never sell. And I have in a hardware wallet for my daughter. Like it's going to her. It's in the will. And then as far as currency, I'm very curious to see what folks are going to do with the Lightning Network and these layer two scaling solutions, where I can go to Starbucks and use some Bitcoin to buy some coffee. I don't think we're there yet. I think there are a lot of smart people who are working on that. But right now, my main thesis is that store of value, digital gold. It's better than gold itself. And the demand is there. And in the scarcity aspect, you have this finite supply, which we've never seen in the history of the world.
Okay, I want to go abruptly. I agree with you, by the way, but I want to go abruptly to the Sam Bankman Fried Jerome Powell meeting.
Mm. It's funny. I went to the DC Blockchain Summit a couple of weeks ago. I met a few congressmen and went on to Capitol Hill, went to different people's offices like Chuck Schumer, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, and I got to see a bit how the sausage is made. And very much, having been at the White House. And then I could see how those folks could have been influenced by Sam and from the crypto advocacy groups, folks that I've spoken to over the years. They said Sam was walking the halls a lot down there in DC. And then, of course, he was making incredible donations and to Democrats and Republicans. So he's building a lot of favorability and influence. And I think that got him these meetings with the Fed. And I've spoken to Caitlin Long about this. And she's like, how did he get that meeting, to buy that small farming state bank, I think it is. And it just shows money in politics, which maybe is a bigger problem. And we need to fix maybe with blockchain. I don't know. But clearly money talks.
All right, so he made $50+ million of campaign donations. They dropped those charges on him, and it looks like those campaign donations are not getting paid back.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. Now, the FTX funds, I know that's pretty much getting paid back, but how do you even claw back political contributions? I don't even know. And this goes back to maybe a blockchain model, which maybe it's 20 to 30 years away, would help with things like this, because bad actors appear in every market, every asset class, right? I like to tell people that Sam Bankman-Fried is the Bernie Madoff of crypto, and Bernie Madoff scammed people in a regulated market. It wasn't like he was in the Bahamas hiding somewhere. So bad actors will appear over time, but to help mitigate some of these fraud activities and catch these things early before they blow up, I think a blockchain model, proper regulations would help. But I don't know, Anthony. Like, how would we claw back those funds, especially if they're used already via campaign costs and things like that? I don't know if you can shed some light on that.
Yeah, no, look, it's been very perplexing to me. I feel like the incentives are misaligned. The reason why people are so negative on our nation's political leaders is that they just feel that there's so much cynicism. They can insider trade in the Congress. They take wild campaign donations into their PACs. They obviously, Sam had an embarrassing level of influence, and you make so many interesting comments in your book. But I want you to after reading your book, I had a reaction that I want to test on you, and then get you to speak to my viewers and listeners about this. I sort of feel like the Gensler Elizabeth Warren backlash on crypto was a direct result of Sam's donations. I'm wondering out loud if they would have taken a more moderate approach had they not been so embarrassed. Of course, Elizabeth Warren, Sam's mom, had worked for her. He had met with her, donated to her campaign. Gary Gensler he met with several times. He met with Jerome Powell. Do you think that the explosion of Sam and the exposure of his fraud left these people embarrassed and caused them to be over aggressive on crypto?
That's a great question. And I have two main theories or thoughts around these items. To your point, the first thought is that, yes, knee-jerk reaction to you embarrassing us, you making us look like fools. You're in DC walking the halls. We're taking photos with you, Maxine Waters, giving Sam Bankman-Fried a hug, blowing a kiss, and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you pull the rug out from under us and make us look like idiots. So I think there is that layer where there's this knee-jerk reaction. However, I think the second layer goes back to that thought of first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. And I think the then they fight you phase was coming because in parallel to these crypto startups, whether you're a Coinbase or you're a blockchain project, you had JP Morgan. I think just even there's news that broke this morning that they're tokenizing on Fidelity's fund on Onyx, and they have JPM coin. So they have their own blockchain technology that they've been building and cultivating over the years, while Jamie Dimon publicly tells you Bitcoin's a scam and a lie. And then, of course, in the book, I cover the ETF race. Why all of a sudden did BlackRock say, we're going to throw our hat in the ring? And then the rest of these big firms came and started off the race. So I think it was twofold. One, the embarrassment, but also two, we got to slow these crypto startups so that we can catch up. The fact that banks and these investment firms are getting disrupted, they can't even hold it directly. And that was the SOB 121 rule. And there's not proper regulations. And for the first time, I think in history, retail front ran these large institutions, being able to buy the tokens directly, didn't have to go through the gatekeepers, didn't have to be accredited. I think those are significant items. And then capital started leaving these TradFi investment funds going into crypto. So you just look at the inflows and the things that have happened over the years where these smaller funds started, making significant returns, exchanges making billions of dollars every year. And then how could these two things be happening in parallel where I don't see BlackRock getting a Wells notice, I don't see Fidelity getting a Wells notice, but these startups in the crypto industry are getting attacked. So I think it's twofold.
Okay, I think it's well said. I just, it doesn't make sense to me because why be negative on crypto? It can lose you votes. Being positive on crypto, I'm not saying it's going to gain you votes, but for sure being negative could lose you votes. It just doesn't make sense as a strategy at this point in terms of the maturation of the industry and where things are. But that's me. Do you think that in the next cycle, meaning the next congressional term, that we will make Bitcoin or Bitcoin blockchain digital assets a bipartisan issue, or will it still be shifted and slanted towards the Republicans in terms of their positivity?
I think there's going to be a shift. I think it's going to become more balanced. And here's why I think so. One, I think Democrats overall, based on some data I've seen recently, are losing some of the younger vote. And the numbers, the demographics show that younger folks own crypto. And crypto is a way for people to create wealth and make themselves or put themselves in a financially better place. Now, if you're against that, you're going to piss those people off. And I don't think if you're already losing that younger vote and you're adding crypto on top of that, you're going to be in a world of hurt come the elections. So that's one. Two, I think the crypto industry finally woke up and said, hey, we got to play the political game. We got to raise capital and we got to support pro crypto candidates. So we've seen Fair Shake and some of these PACs have been raising incredible amount of money and donating accordingly. And Super Tuesday showed us that that strategy is starting to work. There were some folks who came out and said, yeah, I aligned myself with Elizabeth Warren against crypto and I lost, right? In addition to other issues. So that is a good sign, the crypto industry rallying together, donating accordingly. And three, we're seeing the younger voices in Congress, like a Richie Torres on the Democrat side, Ro Khanna, and so forth, who understand technology, who are pro innovation, are starting to realize, hey, why am I going to die in this hill when this is just a technology and an asset class? It can create jobs. It can help us to get incredible economic benefits the same way the dot-com boom did. So it's a weird place where I think you have some of the older folks are like, I don't understand this. I'm going to side with Elizabeth Warren because she has the loudest voice right now. And then you have the younger Democrats who are waking up saying, yeah, that's not the way to do things. So I think those three reasons, we're going to see more of a balance, I think, moving forward.
All right. I want you to be my fortune teller. I've got a big crystal ball here, and it's 2029. So it's 5 years from today. What does the landscape look like for digital assets in America?
I think by that time, we will have absolute clarity for stablecoins, digital assets, tokenized assets, crypto assets, and all different categories, including NFTs and so forth. And then entrepreneurs and innovators will be able to not have to look over their backs and they can focus on building and creating incredible technologies. And then I think more enterprises and individual investors will be able to invest more confidently that, okay, the SEC is not going to come sue this asset and is going to lose $1 billion in value overnight. There's going to be that clarity. And I think within the regulatory body of the SEC and the CFTC, there's going to be balance. I think they're going to find some sort of the middle of the road regulation where, for example, some of these tokens do start off as securities. However, as Hester Peirce, SEC commissioner, has suggested, over time they become decentralized and maybe then they go under the CFTC's jurisdiction. And I think there's going to be more standards, more balance as far as liquidity coming into the market from not just retail, but more enterprises. And I think we're starting to see that with the ETFs. And there's going to be more ETFs outside of Bitcoin and the Ethereum ETFs. There's going to be Cardano, Solana, and so forth. So I think the market's going to grow incredibly.
Let me not to stop you, but
sure.
The question people ask me, so I have to ask it of you. Solana has been deemed by the SEC a security, but you still think that we could get an ETF out of it?
I think so, because there hasn't been a formal lawsuit, for example, against the Solana Foundation. There has been a bunch of tokens thrown in these lawsuits against Coinbase and Kraken and so forth. But I feel that's the SEC throwing things at the wall to see what sticks. Now, the process we've seen so far is the futures markets gets created and then you eventually work your way to a spot ETF. So I think they will approve of futures. We've seen this. They'll approve short ETFs, futures ETFs, because it allows people to short and do all kinds of things. But I think we can see a spot because what's happening too is those lawsuits are not really sticking. Coinbase is fighting back. Ripple's fighting back. Kraken's fighting back. The SEC is getting sued left and right by the industry, which I think is great. There's even startup exchanges, like one out of Texas called Legilex, suing the SEC. Tell us what's a security and what's not. So all of these things don't bode well for the SEC, and they're losing in the courts. So I think Elizabeth Warren and Gary Gensler have lost the narrative a bit that all of these things are securities and this and that and all kinds of the narratives that they tried to drum up.
Yeah, make sense. I agree with you. I think that you can't approve an Ethereum ETF and then call Solana a security. It doesn't make any sense. They've got a lot of egg on their face as it relates to their regulation. Let's go through some of the different sections of your book, if you don't mind. I want to
Sure.
get through as much as possible. We touched on this, but start with the Bitcoin ETF race. How has that asset class evolved in the wake of the ETF introduction?
Anthony, the day the SEC approved the ETFs, and look, it took a court case to do that, right? The judges to call the SEC arbitrary and capricious. But anyway, that's another story in itself. I got so many calls like, hey, tell me about this Bitcoin thing. Hey, what's happening here, right? It legitimized the asset class to the masses who were maybe on the fence looking at this like, I don't know about this. Maybe I should invest, maybe I shouldn't. I've heard bad stories. I heard Sam Bankman-Fried stole all the Bitcoins. I heard Bitcoin and crypto died from Time Magazine, right? All of those narratives are out there, but it was like the ETF approvals pushed away the dark clouds. And then people couldn't even remember FTX or what happened. They were just like, whoa, BlackRock, Fidelity. They were seeing these big names, which really brought the validation. And I think is taking this asset class to higher heights. It's incredible. I've seen such a major change from whether it be institutional investors and their thoughts, RIAs and people I've spoken to, and even just the average Joe and Jane. I don't get that negative talk as much anymore. They're like, tell me how I can invest in this. What should I do? It's no longer, hey, is this a scam? Hey, right? Am I going to lose all my money?
So it's an interesting point that you're making in the book. I'm going to test something on you. This is another thought I had when I read your book, that weirdly Gary Gensler has helped the industry. And let me explain why. He should have, and the lawsuit that he lost more or less says this, he was arbitrary and capricious in denying, including Skybridge, my own application for a Bitcoin ETF, because he had approved the futures ETF. And they're more or less the same thing, and so you can't be arbitrary and capricious. But his political decision not to approve it allowed for the tide to go out. And at low tide, you could see everybody that was swimming naked. And you had the implosion of Celsius and Three Arrows and BlockFi. And of course, the very infamous demise of FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried. Had Gary just approved that ETF, one in November and the next one in February, maybe we would still be living in a world that's loaded with that kind of fraud. And it's like the subtitle of your book, we're in a safer, stronger place today as a result of all of that stuff getting washed away in that period of over leverage and investment uncertainty. So weirdly, did Gary Gensler help the industry?
He did, but scratching and clawing and crying and screaming on the way to doing
Well,
it.
let me say it differently.
Sure.
Accidentally help the industry.
From a macro standpoint and in hindsight, yes. Maybe his overreach, it forced and I think we're seeing a bit of that now, where Democrats are siding with Republicans. They're like, wait, this Gensler's guy is out of control. Like, what is he doing? Why are we being so crazy about this technology and asset class? Let's get comprehensive regulations. Let's protect consumers, but also allow innovation. But to your point, by not doing his job with Celsius, FTX, and so forth, and then starting to attack good actors like Coinbase and Kraken and so forth, folks who have come into the SEC and tried to register and try to work, I think he's kind of forcing the hand of Congress, if you want to look at the silver lining here, right? That they have to now take action because the SEC is getting embarrassed and the industry is saying, hey, this is crazy. This is insane government overreach. What are we doing here? And we need to update the laws. The 1930s, 40s, how we test is not up to par to handle digital assets. So in a way, yes, but I still think Gary Gensler is Elizabeth Warren's puppet, and he's just doing her bidding. And I was actually surprised by Jamie Dimon, aligning with in talking points with Elizabeth Warren a couple months ago at a hearing.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, the world politics makes strange bedfellows. Okay, I've got 5 words for you. I'm going to say the word or the abbreviation. You react to it. Okay, ready?
mm-hmm.
FTX. I say FTX. You say what?
Disaster.
Okay. SEC.
Corrupt.
Regulation.
Needed.
Yeah, see, when I hear regulation, I think partisan. I think they've really ruined it. They've not made it fair regulation anymore that's based on right or wrong. It's hard left regulation now, and I think it's a disaster. I say the word Bitcoin. You say what?
Can I use 2 words?
Yeah, go ahead. Anything you want.
Paradigm shift.
Yeah. I think hard money. I hear Bitcoin, I say hard money. But crypto's different than Bitcoin. I say the word crypto, you say what?
The future.
Well, it's incredible. It's an incredible book. The title of the book is Rethinking Crypto, The Crash of FTX and the Rise of Safer, Stronger Digital Assets. It's written by Tony Edward. Thank you so much for joining us today. And it's a great day. For those of you listening in and not seeing the video, behind Tony is his bit clock, which is just beaming beautiful, beautiful Bitcoin numbers. That's why I could talk to you all day. As long as Bitcoin stays at that price or better, Tony, talk to you all day. Thank you so much for joining us on Open Book.
Thank you so much for having me, Anthony. I appreciate you.
There are thousands, if not millions, of unbelievably good singers, talented songwriters. They never break out. They never turn into iconic figures. Yet the 2 men that you are writing about, they do. What do you think knocked them into the stratosphere? And yet there's thousands of other people that could probably have the scale and range of Billy Joel's voice and perhaps even be as good of a songwriter, couldn't get there.
There's 4 parts. The first is that they were lucky. Luck is always a factor in the outcome of careers, and it seems impossible to ignore that in their case. The second answer is these were, objectively speaking, unusually talented people. With Joel, his ability to craft a hook, a catchy tune, is demonstrably attractive because he was able to do it over a period of time. And Springsteen, of course, as a writer, as a proto-literary figure. The third part is, again, the moment in which they arrived. They arrived when there was an infrastructure in place where they could succeed. There was a fat and happy record business that was willing to underwrite these guys for a few years and have a few misses until they found their way. That's not there anymore. But the last, and perhaps the most important, is that I think that both of these guys were able to compellingly embody an American myth of upward mobility about which they had some sense of self-consciousness and were able to articulate for a generation of people who could really relate to it on some visceral level. People really responded to that and still do.
So joining us now on Open Book is Jim Cullen. He's a teacher, author, and historian, and he wrote an absolutely outstanding book. It's called Bridge and Tunnel Boys, and I technically am a bridge and tunnel boy, Jim, although I can't sing. It's Billy Joel, Bruce Springsteen, and the metropolitan sound of the 21st century. And it's just great to have you here. I understand you're also a fellow Tufts alum and a Long Islander. Right. I had Saul Gittleman on. Hey everyone, it's Anthony Scaramucci here with some straight talk. Let me tell you, we've got 85% of our viewers who haven't hit the subscribe button yet. What's up with that? It hurts. Listen, I made my career by going all in. Right now, only 15% of our viewers are part of our subscribed family. So please take action. This helps us book more amazing guests. Hit subscribe, join our community, and let's turn these numbers upside down. Now back to the show. Open Book. I don't know if you remember the provost.
Of course I do.
He just wrote a new book on higher education, and Saul has been a 40-plus year friend of mine, a very big influence on my life. Helped me get into Harvard Law School, and of course, I'm one of the few goys out here on Long Island that knows the difference between a shagitz and a shiksa, because I took his course in Yiddish literature. But your book was fascinating to me for a number of different reasons. I've gotten to know Mr. Joel mostly, not Bruce Springsteen as much, although I've met him a few times. These were two icons of my era. I'm a 60-year-old guy. I've also interviewed Bob Spitz, who was the author of the Led Zeppelin book. I don't know if you've read that book, but I would recommend that to you. He joined us on Open Book a few months back. And these guys represent a capsule in time for people of my generation. Of course, I'm more biased towards Billy Joel because I'm a Long Islander, and my buddies that are across the Hudson River are more biased to Bruce Springsteen. But why write this book, sir? Give us a little sense of your background. Tell us why you wrote this book. Why did you pick these two guys and not somebody like a John Bon Jovi, as an example?
Well, I guess I'd start by saying that, like you, I'm a bridge and tunnel boy. I was born in Queens. My father was a New York City firefighter. I did leave for a little while in Port Washington, so we overlap there as well.
Oh, wow.
I was the first person in my family to go to college, and I bring that up because I didn't grow up in a house where there were a lot of books or educated people. And instead, my introduction to the wider world was through Top 40 radio. And so, I was an obsessive listener to pop music and a follower of the Billboard charts and that kind of a thing. And Billy Joel, for those of us of our ilk, was an inescapable presence. And I certainly enjoyed him a lot. Although I didn't really think of him as an obsession, nor Bruce Springsteen for that matter. I had older cousins who really were serious Springsteen fans. And then at some point in high school, I just sort of had this epiphany where I realized that this was a very exciting person and that I wanted to be a part of this larger drama that we're all participating in. And of course, that's what's the great thing about pop music, is that it creates, kind of communities. And when I went off to Tufts and I did a thesis there, and which I tried to put Springsteen in the wider context of American history, to see him as the heir of Walt Whitman and Giant Steinbeck and so on, and ultimately wrote a book about him that has just been reissued actually in a third edition. It's called Born in the USA. But the book came about in kind of a funny way, because I had pitched a project to an editor who turned me down because he said that his bailiwick, his area, was regional studies, and what I was proposing was not really a regional book, and therefore he wasn't in a position to say yes. And of course, that was understandable, and it just got me thinking, not really actively, just sort of passively, about what I could do for someone like him. And this project just sort of snapped into place very quickly. I had actually thought about doing a Billy Joel book years ago, had sort of put it aside, and suddenly, and I think we can all intuitively understand that these guys have a lot in common. I mean, they were born within 6 months of each other. One was born east of the city. One was born southwest of the city. They signed to Columbia Records that within months of each other. They issued their first records within months of each other. They hit the big after having a couple of records that didn't do well. They hit the big time within a year or two of each other. They both married models. So there is a way in which they led a remarkable sort of parallel life. But above and beyond that, I was sort of interested in the way in which they represented a specific cultural ecosystem that they were both part of. Those of us of the rock and roll generation, we don't really think of Greater New York as the sort of a cultural hotbed. Certainly, the music business has always been centered in New York. But when we think about rock and roll, we think about the Mississippi Delta, or we think about Bob Dylan coming from the hinterland. We don't think about Long Island or the Bronx. But as I began to look into this, I began to realize that in fact there really is a very rich tradition, and it does have a distinctive style, and it goes back to the very beginnings of popular music as an entertainment genre, with someone like Irving Berlin, who was a Russian Jew who comes to the city, writes hit songs over a period of years, sort of has a career, and it sort of goes forward from there. Whether you're talking about someone like Frank Sinatra, or whether you're talking about Dion DiMucci, coming out of the Bronx in the early '60s, or all the way through the Lovin' Spoonful, the Shore Sound that out of Asbury Park, Brandy, You're a Fine Girl was a #1 record in the early '70s. So these guys actually didn't come out of nowhere. They came out of somewhere pretty specific, and it's really reflected in their musical styles, but it's also reflected in the values that they came of age with.
Well, I mean, they came across to us. And again, like you, I have humble origins. My dad was a crane operator, and since you lived in Port Washington, across from Bar Beach,
Mhm.
which is now a golf course, that was a large sand mine there. And my father went to work there at age 20. He spent 40 plus years there. Started as a laborer. He was a crane operator, and then he was a dispatcher where he weighed the sand coming out of the trucks. You know, they were loaded by conveyor belt. And I grew up in that town. And you may remember Ghost Motorcycle. Do you remember Ghost Motorcycle? So I don't know
No,
when you joined.
that was in the 70s.
Okay, so that went out of business in 1995. But from 1953 to 1995, my uncle Sal DeFeo, a decorated World War II veteran, had a motorcycle shop in Port Washington, and a frequent visitor to that shop was Billy Joel. And so I met Billy Joel for the first time as an impressionable 18-year-old on Main Street in Port Washington, across from Finn McCool's, is where my uncle's motorcycle shop was. And Billy would come in there. He could not have been nicer to the people there. And of course, he told us a story about how he drank shoe polish. He was very depressed, almost committed suicide. And when he finally broke out and made it, he made a solemn promise to himself that he would always be cordial to his fans. And he was certainly that way at age 33, and he looks that way at age 75. But why though? Why did these guys, who are rock and roll Hall of Famers, superstars, how did they come across more regular than their 80s contemporaries?
Well, that's an interesting question, and I think part of that goes to their backgrounds as well. I mean, I'm kind of interested hearing you talk about your background in Port Washington because although I only lived there for a brief time, I know enough to know that it's a fairly affluent town overall, and so living the way that you did, and for that matter, the way that I did. I mean, there is a little bit of a pressing your nose against the glass a bit, and
Well, no,
um,
not a little bit, sir. I grew up in a town where my contemporaries were driving around in BMWs.
yeah, yeah,
My dad was making $33,000 a year working the crane. But let me tell you something about that town, and I think you'll appreciate this. I was blessed to be in that town because they had a great public school system.
yes,
And so
yes,
that public school system plus my grades got me into Tufts.
yeah.
And I had to borrow a lot of money to go through Tufts, but that was really how my career started. And I'm a direct beneficiary of that wonderful public school system in Port Washington.
It was very memorable for me as well. And this is sort of relevant for thinking about Bruce Springsteen and Billy Joel because we think of them as kind of the avatars of upward mobility, which of course they were. But one of the surprising things I learned when I started working on this book is that they're actually products of downward mobility, that their families experienced significant setbacks in the generation before they were born. And that experience really did cast a shadow on their childhoods that lingered for a long time, and so they had that vector, that grounding, that's part of their story. But at the same time, they were born at a remarkably fortuitous moment. I mean, they were born at like the exact point of the baby boom when things are really starting to take off. And you you and I of course went to Tufts and we value our educations, but they came of age at a time when you could actually contemplate not getting a college education. Not that it was necessarily good advice or that their families were happy about the choices they made, but there was enough room in the society, there was enough room in the record business, there was enough room for these incredibly passionate, devoted people, to do what they most wanted to do. And that to a certain extent, I mean, there are always people like that. There will always be people like that. But they were also very lucky in terms of the circumstances of the environment in which they came of age.
Well said. Let's go to Billy Joel for a second. Man, he'll be mad at me for saying this. I'm going to say it though. I feel like he was the less popular of the two for some reason, even though his songs are prolific and he has great popularity today. But growing up in the 80s, and you even described this in the book, the favored son was Bruce Springsteen. If I'm wrong about that, please tell me I'm wrong. But if I am right about that, can you give me some insight, sir, as to why I'm right about that?
Yeah.
What did you think was going on there?
Well, in a narrow sense, you're wrong in that I think Billy Joel has had more hits and sold more records if you totaled it up, overall. And even in their moments in the 70s, I mean, Springsteen was not really a pop star. Billy Joel really was a pop star. But in a more important sense, I think that you're right, and there are a couple of reasons for that. I mean, some of them, reflect, I think. Well, I think one of the reasons for this is the nature of rock critics and the media that grew up around them, which came of age at around the same time. And um, you know, Bruce Springsteen, is somebody who had pretty impressive social skills from the very beginning. Billy Joel, I think, had a little bit of a chip on his shoulder from the very beginning, notwithstanding, encounters like the one you described. Springsteen also had the great fortune of encountering John Landau early in his career, who, basically steered his education and, helped him, I think, manage. And of course, he was a part of the rock critic establishment. So Springsteen was a critical darling, from the outset in a way that Billy Joel wasn't. And Joel, I think, that chip on his shoulder, hurt him in terms of his image management. I think that's true to this day. I mean, I get a little bit impatient sometimes when I listen to Bruce Springsteen because I feel like every sentence that comes out of his mouth has been burnished within an inch of its life. Like he's very sort of self-conscious and careful and so on. And, Billy Joel, I think, has, spoken from the cuff a little bit more to the point of making, mistakes like reading bad reviews from the stage, when he's sort of upset about it. I do think that overall, Joel is the better musician. He has a classical training. His songs are deceptively complex. Springsteen, I think, is the better writer, in terms of lyrics and storytelling, which of course is more accessible to sort of print media folks. I always say that if they had been born in an earlier generation, Billy Joel would have been writing songs for Broadway, and Bruce Springsteen would have been a short story writer in magazines. So to a certain extent, it reflects their sensibilities. It reflects the establishment of which they came of age, and it reflects the kind of work they've done.
Favorite Billy Joel song?
That's a tough one. Um, I really like piano. I'm not Piano Man. I mean, Captain Jack. If you're going back early, I think that a song like River of Dreams is, at the other, 20 years later. I mean, he produced consistently good work over a period of time, and maybe we'll talk about his decision to stop and what that reflects. But what's really marvelous about Billy Joel, I think, is the way in which he is a tremendous gifted mimic, and I mean that in terms of, I mean, he does a mean version of Born to Run, which I'm sure you've heard, but he is able to sort of capture the essence of earlier generations of pop performers and yet sort of put a top spin on it. A River of Dreams is a great example of that because he does this doo-wop thing, the Tokens, the Lion Sleeps Tonight kind of a thing, but then he imbues it with this meditation about middle age, and so he just adds a whole other dimension to this catchy pop tune. That's really his extraordinary gift, I think.
So I got to ask the same question. Favorite song for Bruce Springsteen. Then I want to get into why Billy stopped writing. I think it's a great topic, and you do address it. What's your favorite Bruce Springsteen song?
Well, it's funny. My favorite Bruce Springsteen songs, and I feel almost guilty saying this because it sounds like I'm a little bit fussy or too much of an inside dopester. But I think my favorite Bruce Springsteen song is "This Hard Land," which he wrote
Hmm.
around the time of Nebraska, but never actually ended up making an album until he put it on sort of greatest hits. It's like a beautiful distillation, I think, of his entire
Mhm.
vision. In
It's
terms of
interesting.
hope and sorrow and all that kind of stuff. I also am deeply fond of the song that he wrote for his mother, "The Wish." Springsteen wrote so
Mhm.
many songs from his father, and of course that's a great sort of saga. But the depth of the affection that he shows for his mother, who was his Italian mother, the light of his life, and that expressive Italian Catholicism, which I'm sure you know well, was
Yeah,
such a big
sure.
part of what made him the great artist that he is.
And why did Billy stop writing?
Well, at one level, I think it's as simple as a matter of not enjoying it. I mean, he has often referred to the piano as that beast with 88 teeth, and I think we all know people that for whom some writing, whether it's writing music or writing words, is torture, and it's hard to do. And so I think that was part of it. I think part of it is that a perception on his part that maybe the quality of the work might have been declining. And I think overall, I think you can make a case for that. I mean, for me, the iron, and I talk about this in the book, the irony of Billy Joel is that he's at his weakest, in my view, when he just tries to do straight rock, when he isn't trying to invoke, adapt, allude to sort of earlier generations. Springsteen, his work, I wouldn't say has gotten better at time, and indeed, I think in some ways it's gotten weaker. But he has a different makeup. I think he has a deep need for this, and I think he values work for the sake of working. In an important sense, because clearly he's not doing it for the money at this point, and he doesn't have the platform that he once did. It's just that many of us have. I mean, we just don't know what to do but work. It's the source of value and meaning in our lives, even if it's not necessarily immediately remunerative or or something that has a clear payoff in another sense as well.
Your your book made me think of something that I was dying to ask you, which is probably why I invited you on. So this is the central question. So I want you to think about the answer before you respond. Okay. We both are attracted to musicians and music. We both like songs. I'm sure you have your own playlist on your phone or your car, as do I. And yet we also know there are thousands, if not millions, of unbelievably good singers, talented songwriters. They never break out. They never turn into iconic figures. Yet the two men that you're writing about, they do. And they do for different reasons. And I guess this is a Simon Cowell question. What is the X factor that you look at? Or what do you think knock them into the stratosphere? And yet there's thousands of other people that could probably have the scale and range of Billy Joel's voice and perhaps even be as good of a songwriter, couldn't get there.
Well, there are two necessary but insufficient initial answers to that question. The first, which is perhaps the least satisfying but must be said, especially in the context of the way you're framing the question, is that they were lucky. I mean, luck is always a factor in the outcome of careers, and it seems impossible to ignore that in their case. The second answer is that I think one can say that these were, objectively speaking, unusually talented people. I mean, they as we talked about a lot with Joel, I mean, his ability to craft a hook, a catchy tune, is is demonstrably attractive because he was able to do it over a period of time. I mean, in pop music, you can cruise for a while, but your chance in the spotlight is brief unless you've really got something to say. And Springsteen, of course, as a writer, as a kind of proto-literary figure, although again, one with a great musical, background and a sound that he forged. So anyway, on one hand, you could say that they're lucky. On the other hand, you could say that, hey, they're really great. But I think the real answer to your question, actually, and there's four parts. The third part is, again, the moment in which they arrived. They arrived when there was an infrastructure in place where they could succeed. There was a fat and happy record business that was willing to underwrite these guys for a few years and have a few misses until they found their way. That's not there anymore. They could and did tour for years to support their records. So, part of their luck is the moment in which they arrived. I mean, if you assume that they'd be successful today, and I'm not sure they would, but if you assume they did, it would happen differently. It would have to happen differently. But the last and perhaps the most important, or at least for lack of a better term, original answer I can give you to the question is that I think that both of these guys, and this goes to the title of the book, were able to compellingly embody an American myth of upward mobility about which they had some sense of self-consciousness and were able to articulate for a generation of people who could really relate to it on some visceral level.
No question.
Yeah, and I think that people really responded to that and still do.
No question. And this is a little bit of a follow up question, but when I think of Billy Joel and I think of Bruce Springsteen, I think of a celebration of America. It's a gritty America. It's an aspirational, like you say, upward mobile America. There's a sweetness to Glory Days, and there's a sadness to Allentown. But they're both capturing something about the American spirit of perseverance and trying to reach your dreams. Am I getting that right, sir? Or what
Yeah,
do you think?
I think you are getting it right. And there's a crucial ingredient here of love and loyalty. You know,
No question.
they
Yeah.
love the country, they're loyal to the country, and it's precisely because that love and loyalty is so palpable that they have a certain kind of credibility or seriousness when they're critical of it. It's just that much more um, compelling and believable. You know, when Billy Joel talks about Allentown in 1980, or when Springsteen, talks about the river. I mean, that's what makes the tragedy all the more painful. And on the other hand, that's what makes a song like "Born in the USA" um, so ultimately ennobling. I mean, I don't think Lee Iacocca was necessarily wrong to think that this could make a good Chrysler,
Yeah.
because what he sensed correctly
No, I love
is
that
that it's a
song.
song about resilience, and it's a song
Yeah.
about
Coming
hope.
back.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, the 80s were about the American renewal, right? And so that captured the essence of all that. Before I let you go, you published another brilliant book in 2023 called The American Dream. How do you view that book now? Tell us a little bit about that book.
Yeah, actually, that book came out in 2003. That's goes back a way,
I meant to say
and yeah,
2003. I'm
yeah,
sorry, I said
that's
23.
fine. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a book. You won't be surprised to hear that came out of my own experience. It's not in any way autobiographical, but one of the points I was trying to make in that book, and I think it's important in terms of the contemporary conversation, is that people tend to think that the American dream consists entirely of this notion of economic upward mobility. Of course, that's a big part of the story, going back to Benjamin Franklin. But that's not the only American dream, right? The American dream was a dream of religious freedom for the Puritans. It was a dream of political independence for the founding fathers. It was a dream of equality in terms of Martin Luther King. It was a dream of home ownership, which was such a big part of the drama of growing up in Greater New York. And I think that we need to remember that. One of the and this is something I'm struggling with even in my own work now, is that you and I and people our age came of age when there was a mythology that still felt available to us, the mythology of the American dream, the mythology of the
No question.
frontier. John Kennedy could talk about the space age in the context of covered wagons.
Mhm.
The myth of the good war, whether the good war was to end slavery or whether the good war was to defeat the Nazis. One of the difficult, dare I say, tragic aspects of contemporary life are those myths have been really hit hard, and that's a complicated matter. I don't want to start pointing fingers, but the reality is that we can no longer unselfconsciously invoke them as easily as we once could. And that, I think, makes people like Billy Joel and Bruce Springsteen all the more precious to us,
No
even as
question.
we try to reimagine an American future that is grounded in what we love and what we're loyal to.
Okay, it's beautifully said. We're down to the point of the podcast. I call it the 5 famous words for my podcast. Me and my producer, we come up with 5 ideas, words, phrases. We ask the author to react to them. You can give me a sentence or a word. Let's start with Scorsese.
Scorsese is a great tortured um, uh, exponent of the American dream and all its glory and squalor.
Yeah, of course. And what we're talking about, Jim and I, is Martin Scorsese, the Academy Award winning film director who's about to do a biopic on Frank Sinatra. So that'll be interesting. We'll see what happens there. I'm going to say 1980. You say what?
1980 is a turning point of a society that is preparing to enter Indian summer. It has been beset by doubt. There are dark shadows in the land, but there's also a sense of hope on the horizon. That's inaugurated by Reagan's election and a
Yeah.
bunch of other things that are following in
Mhm.
its wake.
Yeah, and it's fascinating because the New York Times in 1980, I was age 16. They wrote, "Is America able to recover from the malaise that Jimmy Carter talked about?" Time magazine wrote an essay called "The American Renewal: What We Needed to Do." And 2 or 3 years later, we came out of the recession and felt pretty good about ourselves. And of course, we had things like Top Gun in the movie theaters, which was, uber patriotic. The American Dream, Jim. I say the words "the American Dream." You say what?
Well, let me just back up just a second enough to say that, as it so happens, I've written a book called 1980. It's sort of a chronicle of the year. But in terms of the American Dream, um, it's the myth of my life. It's the organizing principle by which I've understood the way the world works and measured its successes and deficiencies of the country.
The last name Joel. I say Joel. You say what?
uh, the prophet of post-war America.
Okay. I say Springsteen. You say what?
Hmm. Um, the the author of the New Testament.
So it's a treatise on how to live. It's a
Well, yeah,
treatise
yeah.
on
I think, and
it's a
I think,
treatise on who we are.
yeah, both of those things. And
Mhm.
again, you and I are the same age, and I think one of the more powerful aspects of this, and I'd be interested to get your reaction to it. Springsteen is a dozen, 12, whatever, dozen years older than I am, and I've always kind of viewed him as a kind of big brother that I never had. In terms of, this was a guy who, shows us, how how to mess up a relationship, how not to mess up a relationship, how to grow old gracefully, how to express patriotic dissent. I mean, there is a way in which he is just such a powerful model and exemplar, not necessarily in a like, do it this way, not that way, but dramatizing the consequences of the choices that people make.
Absolutely. Well, listen, I mean, I'm fans of both, and I have a lot of respect for you, sir. The book is outstanding. The title of the book is Bridge and Tunnel Boys. I really love that title. The title is Bridge and Tunnel Boys: Billy Joel, Bruce Springsteen, and the metropolitan sound of the 21st century. Jim, thank you for joining us today on Open Book.
It was a real pleasure. I appreciate the opportunity.
Hello,
Ma,
Anthony?
yeah, Ma, you ready to be on the podcast, Ma, or what?
Yes, baby.
Of course you are, right? Okay, so
Yeah.
so today my guest was a writer that talked about Billy Joel and Bruce Springsteen. But you have a relationship with Billy Joel, don't you, Ma?
Yeah, of course. I have pictures of me and him and Uncle Sal.
Okay, and what was he like as a guy, Billy Joel?
Very nice, very humble,
Very down to earth, right?
very earthy, very.
Yeah. Did you meet Bruce Springsteen too? Did he ever come
No.
through the motorcycle shop? No. Right?
Yeah, but if he did, I never met him.
Okay, but do you like Billy Joel's music, or are you're not into Billy
Well,
Joel's
I
music?
liked him a lot, so I will listen to it. Is it my style? I'm going to be 88, so I like kind of, you know.
You like Andrea Bocelli, right, Mom? When I come in, all you have on is Alexa. But you've met Andrea Bocelli too, right, Mom?
Yes, of course.
Right. So you just meet all these people, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
So
thanks to you and my brother. I met a lot of people through my brother. I met Forbes, too.
Malcolm Forbes, I remember that. Yep. They all came into the motorcycle shop, right?
Yeah, and Billy Joe was buying bikes left and right, and he's very humble, and God bless him. I think he always will be.
Mm-hmm.
And that was it.
Yeah, no, I found him that way too. I remember one day I got a chance to take him to Carlo's Pizzeria. I was 18 years old. I think Billy was 33. And I mean, he thrilled all the high schoolers when he walked in. He had like a little motorcycle jacket on, and I think we were changing his flat tire or something like that. And he said, let's go get a bite of pizza. You know, he's just a regular guy from Long Island, right?
You delivered his bike and you saw Christine Brinkley because you came home and told me, oh, Ma, she didn't have makeup on like you.
Oh my God, man, you remember everything, Mom.
Of course.
You know, I'll tell you something embarrassing. Okay, I didn't want to leave Billy. I was picking up a bike and he had half a tank of gas, and so I wanted to siphon the gas off for him, put it in the other into the new bike. And me and my cousin Bobby were there, and the way you siphon gas, you got to suck into the tube to create the vacuum, and then you throw the tube into the other tank. Of course, I didn't understand how to do it, and the gas went into my mouth. I was like, that was disgusting. I still remember it. It's only 40 years later. But Bruce Springsteen, you listen to his music, Ma? Not really.
No.
All right, but you like Billy Joel.
I love Billy Joel, and if I saw him today, I think he'd remember me.
Yeah, no, of course.
He was one of the ones that said I look like Natalie Wood.
I know. Okay, Ma. We know, Ma.
He did.
Yes, Ma.
He said to me, oh my God, you know what? You resemble Natalie Wood.
Oh my God.
And I said, well, you made my day.
Ma, you're too much, Ma. All right. Hey, thank you for watching this episode. If you enjoyed this episode, here's another one right up here that you might like.